After a steep drop in demand for air travel during the pandemic, the aviation sector is bouncing back, and then some. Ryanair has just posted a $2.2 billion profit for the first half of the year. That's up 59% on the same period last year. And it's not just Europe's biggest budget airline that's seeing high demand for flight. Lufthansa, Air France-KLM and many other carriers also reported strong sales and profits. Well, let's get a better understanding of the current state of air travel with Steven Truxal, who's a professor of air and space law at Leiden University in the Netherlands. Thanks a lot for joining us on DW Business. Can you just briefly explain to us why we are seeing such big profits from the likes of Ryanair and Lufthansa at the moment?
Well, I think that demand is quite strong, quite frankly. We've talked for some time during COVID times about whether the industry would bounce back and whether it will and to what extent and how quickly. I think even the estimates have been beat at this point. Demand is really strong for air travel. And so that goes to explain that if the demand is strong, then of course, and the supply is limited, of course, prices will fluctuate according to that and airlines will profit.
We've heard from EU figures that they want answers from the airline industry as to why they've been able to sort of make these sorts of profits. And in the meantime, air travel is getting so much more expensive for travellers. They're obviously trying to exert some pressure on the airline industry there, but can the EU actually do anything about these high prices legally?
Yes, well, I mean, I think that there may be a question mark in Brussels about whether and to what extent airlines are investing in greener technologies and sustainable aviation fuels and other things, which they are, well, since last week, 31st of October, mandated to do a minimum of 2% of sustainable aviation fuels in their mix. Some airlines are going above that number, so they're investing quite a lot of money in that. But even those airlines have reported record or near record profits from this past summer. I think that in terms of the law, we have very clear guidelines in Europe about the single aviation market and that prices can be set freely by operators in that market without interference by governments. Still, we've seen in Italy, as an example, the government introducing a cap on a maximum fare on certain flights within Italy, which raises questions about its legality under European Union law.
So as it stands, there is no way to regulate airfares other than the market itself?
Well, in short, yes, the market should correct itself and those fares should be, determined by supply and demand effectively. Now, that's within the European Union. This is for, domestic flights within the Union. And of course, we have to look beyond European Union carriers, the United Kingdom, of course, but also the United States and the Far East Chinese carriers. Indian carriers have the biggest number of aircraft on order at the moment, so they're due to really grow significantly, and they operate to and from the EU, of course. So there will be competition, great competition, increased competition between European Union carriers on the one hand and non-EU carriers on the other on the global market. And so I think we're going to see some potential challenges for the European Union carriers, which of course are subject to EU law all the time. And the other carriers, which are only subject to the extent that they're flying to or from the Union.
So does that mean that the local carriers, and I think Ryanair you could kind of see as one, they largely fly just within Europe, are at an advantage versus carriers who do fly internationally and around the world?
At an advantage? Well, I think if you would ask Ryanair, they would probably say they're at a disadvantage because, of course, they're always subject to the EU law, which is quite stringent on for instance, the refuel aviation regulation, which I just mentioned, came into force last week. I mean, this is going to apply to effectively all of Ryanair's flights, that they will have to mix in sustainable aviation fuels. And of course, the other carriers operating within Europe and the European Union carriers, but they don't, I suppose you could say they're at an advantage that they don't compete with non-EU carriers as much as the legacy carriers, KLM, Lufthansa, Iberia, and so on. So Yes,
Yeah,
perhaps you could say
that's
they have.
what I mean.
They will have
exactly. They are able to work within this framework that is just the EU framework that is basically an essential level playing field for all of the players within that area, and they're not competing with different jurisdictions. You mentioned about.
Still,
well, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, I mean, still, I think there will be questions where I started with this about if there are record profits being made, and of course this is pleasing for investors and so on, and shows the health of that company able to invest in new aircraft, which of course are greener, quieter, less polluting, and all that. But it does raise the question about the investment. To what extent are the investments, the profits that are being made, being put back into these initiatives, buying sustainable aviation fuels and so on? And I think that airlines are doing an awful lot. We don't necessarily see it so much, but they're doing an awful lot to mitigate their impact on climate change, and a lot of money is going into those initiatives as well. And one thing I think I just want to mention, because we hear a lot about the greenwashing cases. I mean, the initiatives that airlines are coming up with to sell sustainable aviation fuels or to offer offsets to flying passengers. Lufthansa, for instance, has something called green fares. Actually, I think the whole Lufthansa group. And there are questions about how. Where on the one hand, the airline is trying to engage with consumers, trying to get them to fly more responsibly, to offset their emissions and so on. And on the other hand, the airlines run the risk of flying in the face of the advertising regulations, and these greenwashing cases are popping up. They've popped up in the US, now here also in Europe. So I think it's a difficult environment for airlines to show what sort of investments that they're making. And the question with these big profits this week are, will those those monies be put into these types of investments, and how can airlines, boast about that and share that with the flying public? That's a question.
So can regulators have any impact on how much airlines are, for example, investing in greener aviation fuels, etc.? Perhaps not necessarily on the investment side, but on the use. So yes, they have. I mean, it's very clear from the Refuel Aviation EU regulation, which is only for aviation. That's also a very special thing. It was the first time that we have this quite kind of public-private partnership in a regulation for aviation, specifically for aviation, which stands apart from the European Union's emissions trading scheme. The UK has its own ETS now, of course, and other Switzerland as well. The point is that ETS system is a cross-sector. So it's, aviation airlines are contributing to, if you like, financially to offsetting or rather reducing emissions in other sectors. And now we have a closed system through this Refuel EU aviation regulation, which is all about the use of sustainable aviation fuels, which is now mandated in the EU. So they can regulate in that sense to require that airlines will use a certain percentage of sustainable aviation fuels, and that will be ramped up over the next 20 years. Okay, so they can't regulate fares, but they can regulate how they spend their money. Steven Truxal from Leiden University, thank you so much for bringing us your expertise.